Disappearing is not about running away from responsibility or shrinking under pressure. It is about stepping back with intention to regain control over your direction. When you remove yourself from constant visibility, you interrupt patterns that keep you reacting instead of creating. Growth requires space, and space is impossible when your attention is constantly being pulled by people, noise, and expectations that do not align with who you are becoming. Many people confuse absence with fear, but strategic withdrawal is an act of strength. It takes courage to pause, reassess, and rebuild while others are chasing validation. Disappearing allows you to stop performing for approval and start producing for purpose. It is a conscious choice to prioritize internal development over external recognition. When you disappear, you reclaim your most valuable assets, time and focus. Every message you don't respond to, every unnecessary conversation you exit, and every distraction you remove creates room for concentrated effort. Growth accelerates when attention is no longer scattered. Focused energy compounds, and compounding is the foundation of meaningful progress. Strategic disappearance also protects your vision. Not everyone deserves access to your plans, your process, or your struggles. Exposure too early invites doubt, interference, and unnecessary pressure. By working quietly, you allow your ideas to mature without being distorted by opinions that lack understanding or investment. This period of withdrawal strengthens self-trust. Without constant feedback, you learn to rely on your own judgment. You begin making decisions based on principles rather than reactions. Confidence forms not from being seen, but from proving to yourself that you can commit, execute, and endure without applause. Disappearing forces honesty. When no one is watching, excuses lose their power. You see clearly how much effort you are actually giving and where you've been settling. This clarity can be uncomfortable, but it is essential. Growth begins the moment you stop lying to yourself about what you are capable of becoming. In isolation, discipline replaces motivation. You stop waiting to feel ready and start acting because commitment demands it. Routines are built, habits are refined, and standards are raised. This quiet consistency creates momentum that does not depend on mood or circumstances. Strategic absence also reshapes identity. You no longer define yourself by past labels or external roles. You become someone who invests in preparation, skill, and depth. The internal shift is subtle but powerful, changing how you think, choose, and respond long before anyone else notices. When you disappear with purpose, you develop resilience. You learn to sit with discomfort, delay gratification, and push through resistance without escape. These traits are forged away from attention and applause, yet they determine who thrives when pressure returns. Disappearing is not avoidance, it is alignment. It is choosing to step away from what drains you so you can build what defines you. It is the strategic pause that allows transformation to take root, strengthen, and mature before it ever becomes visible. True transformation never happens in chaos. It happens when you intentionally separate yourself from what constantly pulls at your attention. Distractions fragment focus, and fragmented focus produces fragmented results. When your mind is constantly reacting to notifications, opinions, and external demands, there is no room for deep thinking or disciplined execution. Separation is the first act of taking your future seriously. Noise is not only sound, it is influence. It is the constant input of ideas, expectations, and comparisons that shape how you think without your permission. To transform, you must limit what speaks into your life. Silence is not emptiness. It is a filter that allows only what is useful to remain. In quiet spaces, your own thoughts regain authority. Limiting environments quietly reinforce limiting identities. When you stay surrounded by people who normalize mediocrity, comfort, and excuses, growth feels unnatural. Separation does not mean disrespect. It means self-respect. You cannot elevate your thinking while remaining immersed in spaces that reward stagnation and resistance to change. Transformation demands uninterrupted focus. Skills are sharpened, disciplines are installed, and habits are rebuilt through repetition, not convenience. This level of focus requires boundaries that protect your time and energy. Without separation, effort becomes inconsistent, and inconsistency prevents momentum from forming. Distance from distraction allows awareness to increase. You begin to notice patterns in your behavior, your triggers, and your routines. Awareness exposes what has been holding you back and what must be adjusted. Growth accelerates when you can see yourself clearly without the distortion of constant external input. When you separate, you stop performing and start building. There is no audience to impress and no image to maintain. Effort becomes authentic and process-driven. This internal shift moves you from seeking validation to creating value, which is where real confidence is formed. Limiting environments also shape your tolerance levels. What you repeatedly see and hear becomes acceptable, even when it is harmful. Separation resets your standards. You begin to expect more from yourself because you are no longer absorbing low expectations from others. Silence strengthens discipline. Without distraction as an escape, you are forced to confront resistance directly. Procrastination loses its hiding place. You learn to sit with discomfort, push through boredom, and finish what you start. Discipline becomes a skill rather than a struggle. Separation creates space for intentional learning. Instead of consuming random information, you study with purpose. You read to understand, practice to improve, and reflect to refine. Growth becomes structured instead of accidental, and structure creates predictable progress. True transformation requires stepping away from what feels familiar in order to build what feels necessary. Distance from noise, distraction, and limitation is not isolation for its own sake, but a deliberate move toward clarity, strength, and sustained personal evolution. Clarity is rarely discovered in moments of noise or urgency. It emerges when you slow down enough to think without interruption. Silence removes the pressure to react and creates space to observe, evaluate, and understand. In quiet moments, priorities become visible and confusion begins to dissolve. What once felt overwhelming starts to organize itself when the mind is no longer crowded. Discipline is formed when no one is watching and no applause is expected. Silence strips away external motivation and forces consistency to come from commitment. You show up because you decided to, not because you are being encouraged. This private repetition trains your character to act regardless of mood or circumstance. Structure is born from intentional planning, and planning requires uninterrupted thought. In silence, you design systems instead of chasing quick wins. You map routines, set standards, and create frameworks that support long-term execution. Structure gives direction to effort and prevents energy from being wasted on randomness. Before results appear, confusion must be replaced with order. Silence allows you to recognize what truly matters and what has been filling time without producing progress. With fewer distractions, decisions become simpler and more aligned. Clarity sharpens focus, and focus multiplies effectiveness. Discipline deepens when excuses have nowhere to hide. In quiet environments, resistance becomes obvious and avoidance becomes uncomfortable. You confront your habits honestly and take responsibility for your outcomes. This self-confrontation strengthens resolve and builds internal authority. Structure transforms effort into consistency. Without structure, motivation fluctuates and progress stalls. In silence, you learn to rely on systems rather than feelings. Daily actions become predictable, and predictability creates momentum that compounds over time. Silence also builds patience. When results are not immediately visible, faith in the process becomes essential. You learn to trust preparation even when there is no external evidence yet. This patience separates those who quit early from those who endure long enough to succeed. Clarity in silence helps you identify unnecessary commitments. You begin removing obligations that dilute your energy. This simplification makes discipline sustainable and structure effective. Less clutter creates more capacity for meaningful work. As discipline strengthens, confidence grows internally before it is expressed externally. You start believing in your ability to follow through. This belief is grounded in action, not affirmation. Quiet consistency becomes the foundation of self-trust. Before results are revealed, transformation is happening beneath the surface. Clarity is sharpening direction. Discipline is strengthening execution, and structure is stabilizing effort, all developing silently while the outward world remains unaware. Identity is not formed by what people applaud. It is formed by what you repeatedly do when no one is watching. Private consistency reshapes how you see yourself because it builds evidence that you can be trusted by your own standards. Each quiet action reinforces a new self-image rooted in discipline rather than performance. Public validation is temporary and unreliable. It shifts with opinions, trends, and attention. When identity depends on external approval, behavior becomes inconsistent, shaped by what will be noticed rather than what is necessary. Private consistency removes this dependency and anchors growth in commitment instead of recognition. When you show up daily without an audience, your internal dialogue changes. You stop asking whether something will be seen and start asking whether it will strengthen you. This shift gradually replaces insecurity with self-respect because you are no longer negotiating your values for approval. Consistency in private builds alignment between intention and action. You begin to trust yourself because your actions match your promises. This trust is the foundation of identity change. Confidence becomes internal rather than performative, grounded in follow-through rather than praise. Without public feedback, progress feels slower but deeper. You are forced to rely on discipline rather than excitement. This depth creates durability. Habits formed in private withstand pressure because they were never dependent on motivation or attention. Private consistency also exposes areas that need growth. There is no image to protect and no narrative to maintain. You confront weaknesses honestly and address them without defensiveness. This honesty accelerates transformation by removing denial and avoidance. As consistency compounds, your self-definition evolves. You no longer identify as someone who tries, but as someone who completes. The identity shift happens quietly, long before results become visible to others. You feel different before you look different. Public validation often rewards beginnings, not endurance. Private consistency rewards finishing. This focus on completion strengthens discipline and reinforces a long-term mindset. You become less reactive to praise and criticism because your identity is no longer tied to either. Over time, consistent private effort creates an internal standard that guides behavior automatically. You act in alignment with who you are becoming, even when it is inconvenient. This internal compass replaces the need for external reinforcement. Identity changes when actions become non-negotiable, regardless of visibility. Private consistency installs a deeper sense of self that is stable, resilient, and independent of recognition, quietly redefining who you are through repeated disciplined choices. Long-term success is rarely the result of a single breakthrough. It is the outcome of standards that refuse to lower under pressure. Elevated standards define what you will accept from yourself when no one is enforcing accountability. They create a baseline for behavior that does not fluctuate with mood, circumstance, or convenience. Intentional habits are the daily expression of those standards. What you repeatedly do becomes what you eventually become. When habits are chosen deliberately rather than accidentally, progress becomes predictable. Success stops being something you hope for and becomes something you build through consistent action. Standards shape decision-making. When your expectations of yourself are high, distractions lose their appeal. You no longer debate choices that compromise growth. Elevated standards simplify life by eliminating options that do not align with your direction. Habits installed with intention create momentum. Small actions performed consistently carry more power than occasional bursts of effort. Over time, these actions compound, producing results that appear sudden but are actually the product of sustained discipline. Without elevated standards, effort becomes reactive. You respond to situations instead of directing outcomes. High standards force proactivity, requiring preparation rather than reaction. This shift places you in control of your trajectory instead of leaving progress to chance. Intentional habits also protect focus. They reduce decision fatigue by turning productive behaviors into automatic responses. When discipline becomes routine, energy can be directed toward growth instead of constantly battling resistance. Long-term success demands patience, and patience is sustained by standards. When expectations are clear, quitting becomes less tempting. You endure delays because your commitment is to process, not immediate reward. Intentional habits make patience practical by breaking large goals into manageable actions. Elevated standards influence identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, maintains excellence, and honors commitments. This identity reinforces behavior, creating a cycle where standards and habits strengthen each other. Habits also determine resilience. In challenging moments, you fall back on what you have practiced. Intentional routines provide stability when motivation fades. They keep progress moving even during seasons of uncertainty or pressure. Long-term success is the natural outcome of refusing to lower standards and refusing to live reactively. Intentional habits anchor discipline, guide choices, and steadily shape a future defined by consistency, excellence, and sustained growth. Transformation is not proven by what you say you are becoming. It is revealed by what you consistently produce. Explanations attempt to convince, but results remove the need for persuasion. Real change takes place. It speaks through outcomes that cannot be argued with or ignored. People often feel the need to explain progress before it exists, hoping words will fill the gap where discipline has not yet shown evidence. True transformation eliminates this impulse. Results stand on their own and require no defense, justification, or storytelling to support their legitimacy. Explanations are usually rooted in insecurity or impatience. They arise when effort has not yet aligned with outcome. Results, however, are the byproduct of alignment between intention, discipline, and execution. When alignment is present, silence becomes more powerful than speech. Transformation that is real shows up in behavior before it shows up in recognition. You move differently, choose differently, and respond differently long before anyone comments on it. These shifts eventually materialize into visible outcomes that others can observe without being told. Results also create credibility. While explanations can be questioned, results establish authority. They demonstrate that learning has been applied and habits have been sustained. This credibility cannot be borrowed or claimed. It must be earned through consistent action. When you focus on producing results, energy is directed toward execution rather than image management. Time is no longer spent trying to control perception. Effort is invested in refining skill, increasing capacity, and improving performance, which naturally leads to tangible progress. Transformation that relies on explanation often fades when challenged. Transformation proven by results endures because it is grounded in structure and discipline. Results reflect internal change that has stabilized and become part of identity. Visible outcomes also reset expectations. Once results appear, the conversation changes. Doubt is replaced with acknowledgement. And skepticism gives way to respect. Not because anything was explained, but because evidence has been presented. Results create momentum. Each tangible outcome reinforces confidence and strengthens belief in the process. This momentum makes continued growth more natural and less forced, reducing the need to seek validation through words. Transformation becomes undeniable when results accumulate over time. Explanations become unnecessary as progress speaks through consistency, performance, and outcomes that clearly reflect the work that has been done in silence.